Hello, and welcome to the Scott Mize Show, a podcast focused on body and hormone optimization and improvement for anyone who's looking to get jacked, build muscle, lose fat, improve their hormones, feel better, or improve their health. Here, I interview experts in lab work, hormones, bodybuilding, coaches, bodybuilders, and everyday people and senior executives who have improved their hormones and improved their body. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started. This podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Anything you hear should not be taken as medical advice. Please consult with your physician before making any changes to your diet, exercise, or supplementation protocols. This podcast is brought to you by Element Electrolytes. Element Lemonade is finally here. It's great for a hot summer day, a workout, or just enjoying with a cold beverage at your desk. Check it out and get your free sample pack of their favorite flavors, along with any regular purchase when you use my custom link, which is drinklmnt.com/scottmize. The sample pack is great for anyone who's interested in trying their most popular flavors or anyone who wants to introduce a friend to Element. Go to drinklmnt.com/scottmize to claim this awesome deal. Now on to the show. Ron RPG Gordan is an IFBB pro bodybuilder whose towering 6-foot frame and dramatic X shape have made him one of the most talked about new names in the open division. Fresh off a 4th place finish at the 2025 Detroit Pro, he's shown he can already push seasoned veterans on a big stage. Ron splits his year between Kuwait, where he works with renowned coach Abdullah Tawabi at the famed 2 Oxygen Gym, and California's Inland Empire, grinding out sessions at Fitness Mania and honing the finer points of his presentation. More than 80,000 fans tune in to his @_Mr_RPG Instagram for his brutally honest training reels, deep dive educational posts, and the occasional inside joke that shows the lighter side of hardcore bodybuilding. Welcome to the show, Ron.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
That was a great intro. I was really listening in like, man, who is this guy?
Well, it's you. You've earned it. It's all true.
Thank you.
So yeah, I'd love to just start with kind of your background, how you got into the sport and got to where you are now.
Well, my background is multifaceted. I grew up in Detroit, Michigan. My first love was actually basketball. So I really wasn't just, one of the kids that grew up and wanted to be like Arnold, although I always loved superhero physiques and things like that, like most kids. From there, I kind of got off into, different jobs here and there. But I actually didn't leave Michigan until I was about 23. My career options kind of brought me out towards the California sunshine. And I've been out here ever since. As far as bodybuilding, that started pretty late for me. I was 30 when I did my first NPC show. I was fortunate enough to win, and the story goes on from there.
Very cool. And nowhere near your level, of course, but one similarity is I just did my first show at 31, so can relate to getting into the sport a bit later.
Absolutely.
And you're a taller athlete in a division that's often dominated by shorter guys. How has that shaped kind of your training philosophy and the feedback you've gotten from judges?
I would say that a lot of guys, especially at the amateur level, when they ask me questions because they are taller, they kind of come from a place of frustration. But I've actually never really felt that way. I've always been quite optimistic about the possibility of what could be when tall guys really, really fill out. And you look at what Samson's doing, you look at what Andrew's doing, even some guys in the past who are even taller. And there is a glimmer of hope, if you will, of what you can be when you really, really fill out that structure. Is it a little bit more work as far as time? I guess you could say that. But at the end of the day, muscle grows. It's just that as it relates to hypertrophy, which is the overgrowth of a muscle, which creates that rounding effect, that is easier to achieve if you're shorter, just because the muscle runs out of space when you're shorter. And when you run out of space, the muscle has no choice but to get rounder and bubblier. As opposed to a longer athlete, they may have just as much, if not more, muscle in that same area, but because they have more area to fill out, the appearance doesn't look like it. So, yeah, it's basically like saying you have a 20-ounce cup to fill out and the other person has a 16-ounce cup. It's going to look like maybe they have more to drink, but in actuality, you just got a bigger cup.
Yep. Yeah, that's very well put. And coming off your 4th place finish in Detroit and 7th in Pittsburgh, what went right? What needs work? And how are you adjusting for the next show?
Wow. What went right? Well, I would say that Abdullah and I have definitely hit our stride as it relates to peaking. for the last couple of years. I think going back to your question about being tall, one of the things that's very, very important for taller, bigger structured individuals is bringing a bit more fullness to the stage in comparison to maybe another athlete who can probably get away with being more conditioned because they don't have to worry about the appearance of being narrow or flat. So one of the things I was happy with was I believe we've had, in my opinion, 3 straight really, really good peaks where the conditioning was good, fullness was good. So those are some things I liked. This year, there was some posing adjustments that I was able to make that I felt like followed me on stage. My rear lat spread was a lot better than last year. So I was very, very happy with that. As far as things that I need to improve, again, I need to get bigger everywhere. Not a cop-out answer, but specifically, judges told me more lower lat development. So that's something that I try to hone in on. And there's a, specific set of about 3 or 4 exercises, not a ton of exercises, but a specific set of about 3 or 4 that I really, really want to get really good at and overload those areas and kind of force some new growth into those positions. And also, when all else fails, maybe you can just pose those areas better.
Yeah. What are those exercises for you?
Well, I actually did a post on one yesterday, which is basically exercises that center around having a vertical pull that actually comes down into the lats as opposed to straight down like a lat pull down. And we've all kind of seen them. I don't have a specific name for them, but basically I think that
Like a high
a lot
row?
of times we hear, yeah, and typically when we have a row, it's coming straight down into our physique. But I find if you really want to hit the lower lats, having the position where it starts off overhead and forward ahead of you, and then bringing it down at that angle tends to help the lower lat development. Whereas for years, myself included, many of us thought that if you want to hit the lower lats, you want to start off at the lower position.
Yeah.
And what inherently happens is if you grab something low, you're going to pull it up high, which goes right back to your upper back. So that's just an example. And obviously, like I said, depending on which gym you're at, you have some, I know Panada has a really good row that's specifically designed for that. If you don't have access to that, that's fine. You can go to a cable, bring up a nice little bench and brace yourself that way and do the same thing. So, extra 5 minutes, but it works the same.
Yeah, cool. And you talked about nailing the peak.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think goes into a good peak? I don't remember the details, but I remember you articulating it on a podcast like a year ago. I think it was the Fit Nation podcast. You were talking about peaking, and I remember you had a really good answer. So I'd love to hear like how you think about peaking and what goes into a good peak.
That's a good question. So the first thing that goes into a good peak, have your ass in shape.
Yeah.
And I think that's a quintessential element that a lot of guys forget when they put all of the blame and issues on coaching and I felt flat. And it's just like, well, none of this works if you're not in shape.
Sure.
So that's the first thing. The second thing, honestly, if I wanted to broad stroke this for a lot of people, would be to have a very open mind and realize, one, that peaks are different for everyone, but also it may be different for the same athlete over time. As your body develops and you grow and you have different needs as an athlete, your posing is going to change, your nutritional requirements are going to change, and so too comes the peak. So within that, you kind of have to develop some strategies. Obviously there are going to be some fundamentals that apply to maybe you and a few other people, but really have an open mind. And the last thing is, have really good open communication with whomever is helping you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
Can you? Okay, cool. Whoever is helping with these tough decisions, because when you peak, like I said, you're inherently in really, really good shape, right? Which means that you're most sensitive to food, hydration, a little bit of training and nuances. So you're not going to be on this meal plan where your coach, if he's worth his worth, gives you 6 meals for the day. Because you may change after the first meal and make the next 5 meals completely obsolete. So you have to have a lot of flexibility, an open mind, and be in shape. And then from there, I can probably help one individual at a time to kind of tell them, these are some things that are probably going to help you versus this person. Bring out your best physique.
Yeah. And how has peaking changed for you? You mentioned it can change for the same person.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are there things that had to change for yourself?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's worked for the last few preps is carbing up earlier. So we're almost carbing up and preparing as if, so most shows start off on Saturday. So we've actually almost had an approach that would seem as though we're preparing for a Friday show. So we're very, very aggressive with the carb up process beginning sometimes late Tuesday, but definitely Wednesday and Thursday. Whereas before, it would be more so a Thursday and Friday project, which kind of puts you in this almost dive bomb situation to
Yeah,
where
it's risky.
you could land and it could look absolutely great Saturday morning. But if it does not, you're kind of stuck with what you have because you don't have any other days. I think one of the issues that I've seen with a lot of people is you do something during prep the entire time, right? And I coach some people and I'm the same way. The last 8 weeks of prep, you're probably drinking about 2 gallons of water every day, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the day you eat the most carbs as you prepare for a show coincides with the day you drink the least amount of water. That doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
What could go wrong? And I think that's kind of an issue that a lot of people fall into is that they're pushing the most amount of carbohydrates into, their carb up the same time they're taking away the most amount of water. And carbs and water go together.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that was the point you made last year that I was like, that makes so much sense. People don't think about it. And talking about Kuwait versus California, what are the biggest differences you notice when you're training under Abdullah in Kuwait versus compared to your sessions back home in California?
Well, I've been asked this question a lot because especially, 10 years ago when everybody thought that Kuwait had the secret sauce to everything that was bodybuilding. And the truth is they do, but it's not what people assume it is. So, if you've ever been through a football training camp or military basic training or anything of that sort, one of the things that makes those experiences so effective is that it isolates you from anything that's not associated with that. And when you really take a step back and experience being in a place like Kuwait, especially socially, is especially from the Western world, Kuwait in effect kind of strips you away from most of the things that actually distract bodybuilders in the Western side. I don't want to get too much into their relations, but obviously their society is run completely different than ours. The gyms are male and or female only. So you don't have the contentious social cues that you may have to deal with. You don't have the distractions that you have to deal with there.
Yeah.
And then outside of the gym, although Kuwait is a nice place and they have many great places to eat, they don't really have a lot of things to contend with as it relates to just eating your meals and getting your rest. Yeah. So in essence, Kuwait offers you a much more distraction-free environment. And one, I think that's because of their society. And I think, two, anytime you go to a new place, even if it's a social hub or not, there's going to be a period of time where you're kind of adjusting, where just because you don't have your footing, you're not going to be into too many things.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely relate to that, like singular focus can be really beneficial. And how would you describe your training philosophy? How is it similar or different from other bodybuilders?
Wow. I would say the first thing I'm going to say is my training philosophy is ever evolving. And I try to keep a handle on some fundamentals because I am naturally a nerd and I have a tendency to lend my ear and want to try so many things, but also realize that, when it comes to executing something, the less thinking you're doing, the better. When you could just turn your body into some sort of machine. The conclusion for me when it comes to training is twofold. I believe that hypertrophy is triggered when the muscle is forced into some level of heightened level of mechanical tension against resistance at any rep form that is comfortable for you. And I think that's kind of the biggest point that I see within the fitness community as far as contention is you have, the sciencey crowd who doesn't want to go over 6 reps. And then you have the traditional meathead crowd who's attached to 4 sets to 12 to 15. Yeah. And I think the truth is there have been guys throughout time who've made great results doing 12 to 15. They just didn't know why. Yeah. See, somewhere within those 4 sets to 12 to 15, they were still triggering what was necessary. But in essence, they probably could have done without 4 of those sets. They're just really, really attached to it. So my training style is kind of a hodgepodge of both. Because I do believe there is some benefit to overall volume that doesn't necessarily contribute to that final set. I do believe that you need some level of expertise within a movement as opposed to anything that doesn't lend itself to that final set. And excess is, that's going to dip into fatigue and fatigue management and things like that. At a
Yeah.
certain point, you got to exercise and you're going to get tired. You're going to get winded. You're going to be out of breath. With that said, I have moved away from the, what do they call them? The finishers,
Okay.
the
Intensity
the
techniques.
sets, the drop sets, the supersets, the
Yeah.
things that make you feel tired and more exhausted, make you feel like you had a better workout that really don't contribute to the goal of hypertrophy.
Yeah.
So I have kind of done away with those outside of one of two things, either individuals who are very, very new and green to training or in some capacity a warm up.
Yeah. That makes sense. Talking about your Instagram, Ron, you mix like hardcore workouts with educational breakdowns and humor.
Yeah.
How intentional is that blend, and how do you think about that branding as an athlete?
Well, I haven't thought about branding at all. But at the same time, I don't just wing it. So honestly, what I enjoy the most is having conversations kind of similar to the topic we just touched on. I love conversations about training, philosophies. What do you think about this? I love to either be enlightened or challenged in respectful ways. And I think more conversations need to be had. With that said, I understand that algorithms and Instagrams and social medias, they rely on likes and clicks and commentary and what's the word they always use? Interaction. So engagement. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. So with that said, I understand that I'm a bodybuilder. I get on stage in my trunks and everything. So I try to have a multifaceted approach to one, bring eyes to my page. But once they're there, I want to have substance. I don't want to just be a guy who has a page and, it's 3 or 4 physique updates or me walking outside in slow motion doing some nonsense all the time. You may see me do stuff like that, but that's not at the heart of what I'm into. And that's not really the type of engagement that I look forward to. And I think I got a pretty good active base, and if you are watching this and you follow me, I appreciate that. And I love your commentary.
Awesome. Yeah. I think you do a really good job of engaging the audience in your own genuine way. So I appreciate it. And then I guess reflecting back on your career from turning pro in 2019 to now, what are some of the key moments, like good or bad, that have most influenced you in the bodybuilder we see today?
I may miss a few because I wasn't prepared for it, but I'll say obviously turning pro initially was like, that's a dream. It's a goal for a lot of us. I just finished second at USA's. So to go from the worst position you want to be in, which is second place, to you got your pro card like 6 weeks later was quite a roller coaster of emotion. So that always stands out. Obviously, going to Kuwait and spending that time there, putting on the requisite size that I kind of gave me a boost. And then from there, just kind of embracing what it means to be a professional. I think that bodybuilding as it stands right now, we have to be honest, we're independent contractors. And outside of our pro card, there's really no rite of passage that's associated with how we carry ourselves, the things that we should be doing day in and day out, how to handle dealing with fans. Everything's kind of on your own. So that takes time. You kind of have to seek that out. You seek out other pros, hopefully good examples. So things that stand out to me were just kind of like, meeting guys like William Bonac, who's a very, very classy, polished pro, seeing how he conducts himself backstage. The first time I competed, I was fortunate enough to see Dexter Jackson, seeing his body transform backstage. That was amazing. Meeting the late Sean Roden, I believe, when was it? It was during COVID. We actually did the California Pro Show, but it was in Las Vegas. That and still being relevant in some way. I've been fortunate enough to have 3 top 5 finishes now. And I finished, a respectable 7th at the Pittsburgh Pro Show, which was, like I said, it was very girthy at the top. So yeah. So those are kind of like the highlights. I still have some very reachable goals, I believe, upcoming on whatever career I have left. But it's been a blast. I enjoy it more now than ever.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's really cool to hear you enjoy the journey. And I was at the Detroit Pro and saw you, and you made a really interesting decision. Correct me if I'm wrong about this. You posed to no music, right?
Yes.
Where'd you get that idea, and why'd you decide to do it?
Oh, it's a good question. So this is my second year in a row doing the Detroit Pro. So the idea actually was born in an accident. So last year, obviously Fuad and the crew, they put a great deal of work into the production of the show. And I think it's probably the most the best rail ran show that we have, especially for a regional show. But last year was the first of its kind. And if anyone was there last year, they remember that during morning comparisons, the music went out and the show went on.
Yeah.
And what I enjoyed about it was it kind of took me back to how shows were, when you look back at some of the Arnold footage where the judge would call out the pose, it was quiet, and then you would hear applause every time the pose was landed by the athletes. And what really makes that even more prominent, I guess, if you will, more effective, was that at the Detroit show, it's an actual theater. It's not a convention center or some other location that's been converted. So it really had a very unique feel to the experience without music and a really cool connection to the audience. So I thought about it and I said, you know what? I think I could kind of use this, especially with me being from Detroit as well. Put that together, the accident, the audience, the atmosphere, and really bring something special. And then at that point, put the pressure on myself to actually have something to clap about.
Yeah. Yeah. It was so cool. The crowd was roaring for you. I think Sid Faruqi also did a fantastic job introducing it and getting everyone hyped up.
Man, that guy's voice is amazing. I'm almost jealous.
Yeah. I'm jealous. He's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was such a well-run show. And can you share a prep challenge or setback that tested you mentally and what tools you may have used to stay locked in?
Well, if there's one thing that's been kind of my black cat, is that I have had some injuries throughout my career. I've had surgically repaired tricep, and the year before I started bodybuilding for the NPC, I had 2 surgically repaired biceps. So I'm quite bionic at this point. And I think when I tell a lot of people that, they associate that with their typical tendonitis, and I'm like, no, I had surgery. This is not a Vicks vapor rub, flex off 44, rub some dirt on it, BPC 157 situation. Like I had surgery, I had consultations, I was cut open and, worked on. So those things kind of taught me, one, that there's life outside of bodybuilding. And I think when we kind of get into this, I think 90% of us were just guys who really, really love training. And then somebody got in our ear and said, hey, man, you got a shot at this if you dieted. And we kind of go down that road. And you don't realize that even though there's a lot of suffering that's associated with bodybuilding, and I'm saying that with reference, there's not true suffering. There's nobody's, it's not world hunger or wartime situation. That just means that you put yourself a lot to kind of promote this physique. You don't realize how attached and almost addicted you can be to doing things that are contrarian for most people. And when that's taken away, you almost feel a little bit lost, because the gym can become your outlet in so many ways, whether it's your social outlet, maybe a form of silent therapy. So for me, I kind of learned that, one, there's more to life than bodybuilding. And 2, you can bounce back. I think that's a huge hurdle for a lot of guys. And I just did a post on body dysmorphia that I haven't posted yet, but a huge hurdle for a lot of guys is not being known as that guy, or people coming up to them and maybe say, hey, man, you lost some weight and it wasn't on purpose. Like, those things are very difficult for a lot of bodybuilders. And they probably won't talk about it. Everybody wants to carry the mantra of not caring what other people think and all of that. And that's just simply not true. There are levels to it. But anyway, those are the things that I've kind of dealt with and kind of learned from. So injuries and the prospect of, climbing that mountain again, they're not terrifying for me anymore. And it's kind of helped me to give others the same advice when they go through an injury or a setback, that, hey, you know what? It's going to be a long 6 months or whatever you have to deal with, but I'm proof that you can come back bigger and better.
Yeah, I think a lot of people listening, including myself, can relate to that with injuries for sure. And looking ahead, what goals or benchmarks on stage and off the stage will tell you that RPG has arrived, and how do you plan to get there over the next couple seasons?
Simply put, I need to win a pro show. At this point, I've placed 3rd, 4th, and 5th in my career, and I've done well at the Pittsburgh Pro Show. And looking at the landscape of some of these other shows that have recently transpired, I feel like it could have placed well there too, although it just didn't fit into this year's plan. My goal going forward is to have a very abbreviated offseason and prepare for some shows at the very end of the calendar year. Maybe one of the Romania, Prague type shows. And reason being, is that, bodybuilding and your career in bodybuilding is what you make it. See, there are some guys who get there, and there's nothing wrong with any of these particular types, but there are a lot of guys who they get their pro card and then they just wait till their local show comes up every year. They do that show and then they go back and then, maybe they have a job or whatever, and that's it. And it's nothing wrong with that. And then obviously on the other end of the spectrum, you have your superstars who are traveling 365 days of the year. They're making appearances. They're doing guest posings. They're signing autographs. It's their full-time job. Okay. And I think I need to be somewhere closer to that end of things. Obviously, I still have to pay the bills, but I want to travel. I want to have some other things associated with whatever my career is going to ultimately be outside of, Ron Gordon did some local shows. He did some regional shows throughout the country. He placed well and that was it, And if it happens that that's the case, I'm completely fine with that too. But if I have the opportunity to add some more and pad the resume with some other experiences, I think I should.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you definitely can. Sky's the limit. So I'm very excited to follow along. Folks listening, make sure you follow Ron on Instagram if you're not already. Thank you so much for the time, Ron. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Great to chat with you.
All right, brother.